What I am about to tell you, I debated whether to say publicly. For years, I kept this within the confines of private spiritual direction. But given what is happening in the world right now, given the acceleration of evil I am witnessing in my exorcism ministry, given the collapse of the family, their apostasy inside the church, and the spiritual darkness descending on nations, I can no longer remain silent. What I am going to share with you today is not a theological opinion. This is not speculation. This involves verified private revelation. The testimony of souls under spiritual direction, and something that was made known to me in a context I am bound in conscience to take seriously. The 3 days of darkness is real. I know there are Catholics who dismiss this. I know there are priests who wave it off as folk religion, as medieval superstition, as the hysteria of poorly catechized lay women in the 19th century. I used to be careful about this topic myself. Careful, guarded, measured. I'm not guarded anymore because the pattern I am seeing in the souls I counsel, in the demonic entities I encounter during exorcisms, in what they say before they are expelled. All of it is pointing to the same convergence, the same timeline, the same warning. And now I need to tell you about 3 cities. 3 specific cities that were revealed not to me directly, but through a chain of private revelation that I have carefully examined, cross-referenced with approved Maran apparitions, and measured against the writings of the great mystics of the church. What I am about to tell you may disturb you. It should disturb you, but more importantly, it should prepare you, because the darkness is coming and most Catholics are not ready. What the church has always known about the 3 days of darkness. Let me begin with theology. Because before we talk about prophecy, before we talk about cities, before we talk about what Our Lady revealed, we need to establish the foundation. And the foundation is this. The concept of the 3 days of darkness is not something invented by visionaries. It is rooted in sacred scripture itself. In the book of Exodus 10:22, we read of the 9th plague sent upon Egypt. Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there came thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. 3 days total darkness. A supernatural punishment upon a civilization that had hardened its heart against God. This was not a solar eclipse. This was not a weather event. This was a direct intervention of divine providence in the affairs of nations. The fathers of the church understood this. They understood that the plagues of Egypt were not merely historical events. They were prophetic types, foreshadowings of what will happen at the end of the age. St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa teaches us that God, in His providence, permits chastisements upon nations when those nations have reached a degree of corruption that would otherwise spread like a cancer to the entire human race. The chastisement is paradoxically an act of mercy. It is the surgeon's scalpel, not the executioner's blade. Now, the 3 days of darkness as a prophetic event appears across multiple centuries, multiple mystics, multiple countries. And this is significant when you see convergence across time and geography and private revelation. That is a signal that demands serious theological attention. I am not saying these are dogmas of the faith. The church has never defined the 3 days of darkness as an article of faith. But the church has also approved many of the apparitions and mystics who spoke of it. Blessed Anna Maria Tai, a 19th century Italian mystic whose cause for beatification was rigorously examined, spoke explicitly of 3 days and nights of darkness. She described a cold and bitter wind, a darkness so complete that not even candles would give light, with the exception of blessed candles held by the faithful. She described fire, hail, and storms. She described entire cities being reduced to rubble. This woman was examined by multiple cardinals. Her prophecies were not condemned. They were taken seriously by the Vatican itself. Then we have Padre Pio, a man who bore the stigmata for 50 years, whose sanctity has been confirmed by the Church, wrote privately to the Commission of Heralds of the Bach in 1950. And I want you to understand the context here. This was a private letter. He was not writing for publication. He was writing because he believed it was his duty. And in that letter, he described the 3 days of darkness in terms almost identical to blessed T, though he had no known direct access to her writings. That kind of convergence does not happen by accident. Now, I want to address the objection I always hear from my fellow priests. They say, Father, private revelation is not binding. Catholics are not required to believe it. And they are correct. But that argument, while theologically accurate, is also spiritually dangerous when used as an excuse for indifference. The Church does not require you to believe that the sun danced at Fatima on October 13th, 1917. But if you had been standing in that field in Corvaderia and you chose not to look up because private revelation is not dogma, you would have missed the miracle with your own eyes. Prudence, not skepticism, is the virtue required here. Now, here is what I need to establish clearly before we move forward. The 3 days of darkness, according to the mystics, is not primarily a punishment of fire and stone. It is primarily a spiritual event. It is a final confrontation between the forces of hell and the protection of heaven. The darkness itself is demonic, not merely meteorological. What descends upon the earth is not simply the absence of light. It is the presence of malevolent supernatural power unleashed in a way that has not occurred since the days of Noah. This is why in my exorcism ministry, I began paying attention when demons under compulsion, bound by the authority of the Church, began referencing this event. I want to be careful here because demonic testimony is always suspect. Demons are liars. The prince of lies is their father. But there is a principle in exorcism theology, one that goes back to the early fathers, that when a demon is compelled under obedience to God to speak the truth, particularly about matters related to divine providence and the enemies of hell, what they say can carry a degree of reliability, not certainty, but it cannot simply be dismissed. And what I was hearing from certain demonic entities across different exorcisms with different individuals in different states and countries was disturbingly consistent. They were angry, not with the kind of theatrical anger you see in Hollywood films. This was a cold, seething fury, the fury of a creature that knows its time is running short. They spoke when forced about a coming confrontation about a woman about 3 days. I began documenting this in 2019. Then something happened in 2022 that changed everything for me personally. A soul came to me under spiritual direction. A woman of extraordinary holiness whose entire life of prayer and penance I had been witnessing for over 4 years. She told me that Our Lady had appeared to her and that Our Lady had shown her something specific. She had shown her 3 cities. I will tell you about those cities, but first, you must understand what the 3 days of darkness actually means for the church and why Our Lady's role in this event is not peripheral. It is central, Our Lady's role in the 3 days. The woman clothed with the sun in the book of Revelation 12:1, St. John writes, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head." This image is foundational. The church has always understood this woman to be at the primary level, the Virgin Mary. And the great dragon described in verse 3, who waits to devour her child, is Satan himself. This is not allegory. This is cosmic war. What I need you to understand, what most Catholics sitting in their comfortable parishes on Sunday morning have never been taught, is that this war is not finished. Revelation 12 is not a description of something that happened only in the past. It is a living description of the spiritual reality that exists right now. In this moment, in the invisible realm that surrounds us, the battle between Our Lady and the ancient enemy is ongoing. Now, here is where it becomes relevant to the 3 days of darkness. Every single approved apparition of Our Lady in the modern era, Lhasa, aka, carries the same thread, the same warning. The message is not everything is fine. Pray a little more, have a nice day. The message is urgent. The message is a warning of chastisement proportional to the degree of sin that humanity has embraced. At La Salette in 1846, Our Lady wept. She wept. Think about that. The Mother of God stood on a mountainside in rural France and wept in front of 2 peasant children. Why? Because She had seen what was coming. She told Melanie and Maximon that nature would demand satisfaction for the sins of men. She described famine, plague, wars, and in the secret portion of the message, things so terrible that Pope Pius the IX reportedly palled when he read it. At Fatima in 1917, Our Lady showed 3 children a vision of hell, not a theological concept, not a diagram, a vision direct, visceral, terrifying. Sister Lucia spent the rest of her life trying to describe what she saw. Millions of souls falling into a sea of fire like snowflakes, shrieking and howling in despair. Well, Our Lady showed this to children. Children, because she needed the world to understand that the stakes are eternal. And then there is a Japan, 1973. Sister Agnes Asagawa, approved by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger himself, cites later Pope Benedict I, 16th in 1988. At Akita, Our Lady said something that has never been fully absorbed by the Catholic faithful. She said, "Fire will fall from the sky and will wipe out a great part of humanity." She said, "The good as well as the bad will perish, sparing neither priests nor faithful." She described a catastrophe of biblical proportion. These are not the words of a sentimental devotion. These are warnings. Now, in the theology of private revelation, there is a distinction between absolute prophecies and conditional prophecies. An absolute prophecy will happen regardless of human response, where a conditional prophecy depends on the response of humanity. It can be mitigated, delayed, or even averted through prayer and penance. The Ninevites were warned of destruction by Jonah. They repented. The destruction was averted. Most of the great Marian prophecies appear to be conditional. Our Lady comes precisely because she is asking for a response that could change the outcome. But, and this is the part that I find deeply sobering, there is a threshold. There is a point at which the chastisement shifts from conditional to inevitable. Not because God becomes vindictive, but because justice requires it. Because the sin has reached a level where the entire spiritual ecology of human civilization is being destroyed. I believe we have crossed that threshold. I did not arrive at that conclusion lightly. I arrived at it after 30 years of dealing with the demonic. After 30 years of sitting across from people whose lives have been shattered by sin and spiritual attack. After 30 years of watching the church from the inside, and I will tell you honestly, what I have seen inside the church in the last 20 years has shaken me more than anything I have encountered in the exorcism room. Because the enemy is not only outside the walls, he is inside. The corruption, the apostasies, the cowardice of shepherds who will not name evil for what it is, the liturgical chaos, the dissolution of Catholic identity in the name of dialogue and accompaniment. These are not administrative failures. These are spiritual catastrophes. And Our Lady at Fatima, at Akita, in every approved apparition, warned us specifically that the corruption would come from within the clergy. She told us we didn't listen. Now, here is the direct connection to the 3 days of darkness. According to multiple mystics, and this is consistent across Tai Chi, Saint Hildegard of Bingen and others, the 3 days of darkness will be preceded by a period of intense spiritual darkness. A period where confusion reigns, where truth is suppressed, where the faithful feel abandoned. Sound familiar? We are in the period of preceding darkness right now. And Our Lady's role in the 3 days is not passive. According to the mystics, she is the one who intercedes at the throne of God for the mitigation of the punishment. She is the woman who stands between humanity and the full weight of divine justice. The blessed candles that are set to provide light during the 3 days, they represent her protection, her intercession, her mantle over the souls who have consecrated themselves to her. But she also came to warn about specific places. The soul I mentioned, the woman of deep holiness under my spiritual direction, described 3 cities to me in a session that lasted nearly 2 hours. She was not dramatic, she was not emotional, she was precise. And what she described matched things I had no reason to expect. The first city, what was shown and why I am going to be very deliberate in how I present this, because I am a priest, I am a theologian, I am not a sensationalist. I have spent my career warning people against false private revelation, against emotional manipulation, against the kind of spiritual theater that does nothing but feed curiosity without producing conversion. So let me say this plainly. I am not naming these cities in order to cause panic. I am naming them with the caveats I am about to provide, because the purpose of prophetic warning has always been to produce repentance, preparation, and prayer. If this information produces anything other than those 3 things in you, then you are receiving it wrongly. The first city shown to this soul under spiritual direction was a major port city, a city connected to the sea, a city with a long history of both great Catholicism and great apostasy, a city where the faith once flourished and then was systematically destroyed from within, both culturally and institutionally. Now, I will not name the city directly, but I will tell you the characteristics that were described to me, and I will let those who have ears to hear, hear. This city was shown in the vision as being struck first, not after the darkness had fully descended, but at the beginning. At the onset of the 3 days, the soul described it as seeing a great light, not a holy light, but a devastating light, followed immediately by the absence of all light. The sequence was rapid. The city was caught unprepared. What was striking, and this is what made me sit up in my chair, was the detail that preceded the catastrophe. She described seeing in the vision the churches of this city, and the churches were empty. Not empty because of persecution. Empty because the people had chosen to leave. The pews were abandoned. The tabernacles were present, but the faithful were gone. Not driven out by force, but departed by choice. They had drifted. They had chosen the world. This is consistent with what Blessed Thai described as the spiritual condition that precedes the 3 days. She wrote that the darkness would come upon a world where the majority of even baptized Christians had effectively abandoned the practice of the faith. Not formally, not with a declaration of apostasy, but simply by attrition, by distraction, by comfort. The second detail that arrested my attention was this. She described the harbor of the city. She described ships, and the ships were stationary. They were not moving. She interpreted this as signifying that the catastrophe would strike in a moment of commercial activity, of trade, of economic bustling, a moment when the city was most confident in its own productivity, most convinced of its own prosperity. There is a type here that the theologians will recognize immediately. The destruction of Sodom came when Lot's contemporaries were eating and drinking. The flood came when men were marrying and giving in marriage. Divine intervention in the affairs of nations tends to come precisely at the moment when humanity is most deeply convinced that it does not need God. The third detail, and this one I have sat with for a very long time, was the sound she described hearing in the vision. She said it was not an explosion, it was not an impact sound. It was a sound she could only describe as a tearing, as if the fabric of something were being ripped, as if the physical world were being pulled back like a curtain. I know what that means theologically. It means the veil between the natural and the supernatural was being collapsed. The 3 days of darkness, as the mystics have consistently described it, is not merely a physical event. It is a metaphysical event. The laws of nature are being superseded by divine power. What people will experience is not only physical darkness. It is the withdrawal of the natural protection that God's providence ordinarily provides to human civilization. When that protection source is withdrawn, even partially, the demonic has access in ways that it normally does not. This is why the instructions given through the mystics are so specific. Stay inside. Do not open doors or windows. Do not look outside. Do not respond to voices calling your name, even if they sound like loved ones. Because during those 3 days, the demonic will be unleashed in a way that is unprecedented in human history. The soul I spoke with asked Our Lady in the vision why this city was first. What had made it the point of initiation when she described Our Lady's response, not as words, but as an image. She was shown the history of this city. She was shown its Catholic heritage. She was shown the saints who had walked streets, the priests who had died for the faith within its borders, the graces that had been poured out upon it over centuries. And then she was shown what had been done with those graces. They had been rejected, not in a single dramatic act of rejection, but slowly, generation by generation, grace after grace offered and declined. The city had been given more than most and had squandered it more than most. And in the spiritual economy of divine providence, the measure of one's accountability is proportional to the measure of grace received. To whom much is given, much will be required. This is not a punitive God acting from anger. This is a just God acting from justice. The same justice that is at its deepest level an expression of love. Because to allow souls to continue in a trajectory that leads to eternal damnation without any intervention, without any dramatic call to conversion, that would itself be a failure of love. The chastisement on this city is paradoxically a final act of mercy. The question is whether there are enough souls in that city who will hear the warning in time, who will go to confession, who will consecrate themselves to Our Lady, who will light their blessed candles and keep them ready, Because the night is coming, the second city, a warning to the heart of Western power, the second city described in this private revelation, is in many ways more disturbing than the first, because the first city is a city that many Catholics, if they heard its name, would nod and say, yes, I understand that city has turned from God. There would be a grim familiarity to it, a tragic logic. Second city offers no such comfort because the second city is not known primarily for its apostasy. It is known for its power. It is a city that sits at or near the center of political and cultural authority in the Western world. A city whose decisions affect hundreds of millions of people. A city that for generations has projected an image of strength, of civilization, of ordered governance. And that is precisely the problem. The soul described being shown this city from above as if from a great height, when what she saw was extraordinary. She described seeing two realities simultaneously: the visible city as it appears to the human eye with its monuments, its institutions, its symbols of authority, and beneath it, or perhaps woven into it, a second reality, a spiritual reality. And in that spiritual reality, the city was shown to be hollow. The word she used was hollow, like a structure that has maintained its external form but has been eaten from within. The buildings were standing, the streets were populated, the institutions were functioning, but the spiritual substance, the animating principle of Christian civilization that had once given those institutions their legitimacy and their meaning, was gone. This is what the mystics call a civilization that has become a carcass. It retains the shape of what it was, but the life has departed. St. Augustine described something similar in the City of God when he wrote about the fall of Rome. The pagans blamed the Christians for Rome's fall. Augustine's response was to show that Rome had already fallen internally, spiritually, long before the Visigoths arrived at the gates. The external collapse was simply the physical expression of a spiritual reality that had already occurred. What this soul was shown is that the same dynamic is at work in this second city. The external collapse, the attack during the 3 days, is not the beginning of the city's destruction. It is the culmination of a destruction that has been occurring for decades invisibly in the spiritual realm. Now, I want to be precise about the nature of what she was shown regarding the attack on this city, because it was different from the first city. First city was shown being struck in a way that suggested physical destruction of a sudden and overwhelming nature. The second city was shown something different: a paralysis, a cessation of authority, a moment in which all the mechanisms of power, political, military, institutional, simply stopped functioning. In the vision, the lights went out in the buildings of power, not metaphorically, literally. Every system through which human beings exercise collective authority, every coordinating mechanism of civilization ceased to operate, and into that vacuum something entered. She could not describe it fully. She said it was like trying to describe a color that does not exist in the visible spectrum. She said she knew it was demonic, but not individual demons, not the kind of possessing entity I deal with in exorcism. This was something more like a collective spiritual force, a wave of malevolent intention given temporary but terrifying permission to operate freely in the physical world. This is consistent with what the mystics describe as occurring during the 3 days. The Catholic tradition speaks of this period as a time when God withdraws temporarily the restraining hand of His providence. The demonic is normally constrained not because it lacks the desire to destroy, but because divine providence limits its access. During the 3 days, that limitation is reduced. The demons are given a degree of freedom proportional to the degree of sin that humanity has accumulated. Think of it as a spiritual debt that has been building for generations. The debt comes due. The instructions given through Padre Pio, through Thai, through others, take on new urgency when you understand this. They said, stay inside, close your windows. Close your doors. Do not open them for anyone. Do not look outside, because what will be moving through the streets of these cities during those 3 days is not something that human eyes should behold. It is not something that human psychology can encounter and remain intact. The soul told me that in the vision of this second city, she saw people who had gone outside, people who had not heeded the warning either because they didn't know it, or because they didn't believe it, or because curiosity overcame prudence. And she described their faces. I will not describe what she described, but I will say this: the instruction to remain inside is not superstition. It is not medieval folklore. It is a spiritual survival instruction from heaven itself, passed down through multiple centuries and multiple mystics, cross-referenced and consistent. And for this second city, this city of power and hollow grandeur, the warning is perhaps more urgent than anywhere else, because the people of power in this city have more than any others made themselves into gods. They have sat in their halls of authority and made decisions that have destroyed the family, that have promoted the culture of death, that have systematically dismantled the Christian foundations of Western civilization. And they have done so with the calm confidence of people who believe they are accountable to no one. They are about to discover they are accountable to someone. The response Our Lady asked for regarding this city was specific. She asked for rosaries, not one, not a few. She asked for continuous, sustained, organized chains of rosary prayer from the faithful, directed specifically at the conversion of those in political power and at the mitigation of the coming judgment on this city. Because even now, it is not too late. The window is narrowing, but it is not yet closed. The third city, the one that surprised me most. I have been in this ministry for a long time. I have heard things in the exorcism room that would make a secular psychiatrist question his own sanity. I have sat with mystics and visionaries and discerns their experiences against the gold standard of Catholic theology and the teachings of the saints. I have read the great literature of Catholic mysticism, John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena, Steiner, Kowalska. I thought I knew what to expect when this soul described the third city. I was wrong. The third city surprised me not because of the city itself, though that was unexpected, but because of the reason given for it being included. Because the first two cities had a logic that once explained made theological sense. Great apostasy, great accountability, great power, great judgment. The third city followed a different logic entirely. This city is not a capital. It is not a major port. By the standards of global power and influence, it would be considered secondary, perhaps even obscure to people who think in terms of geopolitical importance. And yet, in the vision, it was shown with the same gravity, the same spiritual weight as the other two. The soul asked Our Lady, why? What had this city done? What made it equivalent in terms of prophetic significance to cities that carry vastly greater temporal power? And the answer given was this: it was not what this city had done. It was what this city had been given and what had been done with that gift. This city, and again, I am describing characteristics rather than naming it directly. This city had been the site of a significant religious event within living memory, an event that had drawn the faithful, an event around which a genuine renewal of Catholic life had begun to coalesce. There had been grace poured out in this city tangibly, visibly, in ways that even skeptics had taken note of. And then something happened. Not a single dramatic event, a slow corruption, a gradual capture of the institutions through which that grace had been flowing. The organizations, the communities, the structures that had been built in the wake of that religious event were one by one infiltrated, compromised, rarely here turned toward purposes that were the opposite of the terrorism they had been given. And the people of that city, many of them had either failed to notice or had chosen not to notice, because noticing would have required action. It would have required standing up, speaking out, paying a social cost. And comfort is a more powerful sedative than most people realize. The third city in the vision was shown not being struck the way the first two were shown. The soul described something different. She described the city being overshadowed as if a great darkness simply settled upon it like a fog, like a shroud, not sudden, not violent, gradual and complete. And in that darkness, she said, the people wandered. They were alive, but they could not find each other. They could not find their homes. They could not find the churches. And the churches, those churches that had once been centers of authentic spiritual renewal, were locked from the inside. Locked not by persecutors, but by the people within them. By those who had captured those institutions and who, when the darkness came, chose to protect themselves rather than open the doors to the desperate souls outside. Sighs. This image shook me more than anything else in the entire account, because I have seen this happen not in a prophetic vision, in real life. I have seen communities that were founded on authentic heroisms become captured by leadership that is more concerned with institutional survival than with the spiritual welfare of souls. I have seen churches that should be sanctuaries become fortresses of control. And when the sheep need the shepherd most, the shepherd locks the door. Our Lord had a word for that kind of shepherd. He called them healings. The third city carries a specific warning for the Catholic faithful, and it is this: do not place your trust in institutions. Do not assume that because something has a Catholic name, a Catholic history, or a Catholic aesthetic, that it is spiritually safe. The greatest spiritual dangers in the coming days will not come from obviously pagan sources. They will come from within structures that look Catholic on the outside. Test everything against the perennial teaching of the church. Test everything against the Gospels. Test everything against authentic tradition. Not the manufactured tradition of the last 60 years, but the living tradition that goes back to the apostles, and cultivate in your own home the ability to be the church for your own family. Because the time may come, is perhaps coming, when the institutional church in your area is not available to you in the way you expect. The sacraments may become harder to access. The priests who preach the truth may become fewer. The sanctuaries that are genuinely safe may be more difficult to find. This is not a reason for despair. It is a reason for preparation. The practical preparation that the mystics have always recommended is specific and simple. Blessed candles kept in ready. Confession received frequently. Do not let more than a month pass without going to confession. The rosary prayed daily. The scapula worn and received through the proper rite. These are not magical objects. They are sacramentals, physical points of contact with the grace of heaven, chosen by Our Lady herself as instruments of her protection. When finally, and this is perhaps the most important practical instruction of all, forgive everyone who has ever wronged you, not for their sake alone, for yours. Because the soul that carries unforgiveness into the 3 days of darkness carries with it a vulnerability that no physical preparation can compensate for. The enemy knows where the wounds are when he is very good at exploiting them. Prepare your soul, prepare your home, prepare your family. The third city is a mirror. When you look at what happened there, when you see the gift squandered, the grace captured, the door locked against the desperate, the question to ask isn't that terrible? The question is that me? Is that my parish? Is that my community? Is that my heart? What you must do before the darkness falls. I want to close this in the way I would close a retreat conference, because everything I have shared with you today, the theology, the private revelation, the 3 cities, the warnings, all of it is useless if it does not translate into concrete, practical spiritual action in your daily life. Prophecy without conversion is just entertainment. And I refuse to be entertainment. So let me tell you as clearly and as pastorally as I can what the tradition of the church has always said about how to prepare for a period of great chastisement. Not my opinion. The tradition, first, the state of your soul is the only thing that matters. Not your bunker, not your food storage, not your generator, not your plans. If you were to die tonight, and many of the people who died in the cities of Pompeii also did not expect to die that day, what would be the state of your soul? Are you in a state of grace? Have you made a good confession? Have you repaired to the best of your ability the damage caused by your sins? Have you made peace with God, with the church, with the people in your life whom you have wronged? This is the first and only irreplaceable preparation. Everything else is secondary. Second, Marian consecration. I am not talking about a sentimental devotion to a pretty statue. I am talking about the formal, total consecration of yourself to the Immaculate Heart of Mary according to the method taught by Saint Louis de Montfort and adopted at Fatima by Our Lady herself when she appeared to the 3 children. This consecration is not a formula. It is a spiritual reality. It places you under her mantle in a way that has concrete effects in the invisible realm. The mystics are unanimous on this point. Those who are consecrated to Our Lady will receive a specific protection during the 3 days. Not a guarantee of physical survival that is in God's hands alone, but a protection of the soul, a clarity of mind, a peace of heart. In the midst of the worst spiritual darkness in human history, those under her protection will know what to do and will not be driven to panic. That is not a small thing. Third, the blessed candles. I know this sounds old-fashioned. I know that in the age of flashlights and battery-powered lanterns, the instruction to have blessed candles seems quaint, but the mystics were specific about this. Ordinary candles will not give light during the 3 days. Blessed candles, candles that have been blessed according to the traditional rite of the church will. This is not a mechanical claim. It is a sacramental claim. The blessing of candles is one of the oldest sacramentals in the church, going back to the presentation of our Lord in the temple. Get your candles blessed. Keep them in your home. Have them ready. Fourth, stay informed through the right sources. And here I need to say something that may be uncomfortable. There is an enormous amount of content circulating right now on the internet, on Catholic platforms, in well-meaning communities that purports to be reliable information about private revelation, about prophecy, about the end times. Much of it is not reliable. Some of it is actively dangerous because it substitutes sensationalism for discernment, because it feeds a kind of spiritual thrill-seeking that is the opposite of the sober preparation that the traditional calls for test every claimed revelation against three things. Does it contradict divine Catholic doctrine? Does it produce fear rather than conversion? Does it come from a source that cannot be verified against the consistent witness of approved mystics and the teaching of the church? If the answer to any of those three questions is yes, be very careful. Fifth, build community. I cannot emphasize this enough. The spiritual life was never meant to be lived in isolation. The domestic church, the family household, is the fundamental unit of Christian civilization. It was always so, and it will be especially so in times of crisis. Know your Catholic neighbors. Know the faithful families in your area. Build the kind of relationships where if something catastrophic were to happen, you would not face it alone. And cultivate relationships with good priests. I say this knowing that the supply of genuinely orthodox, spiritually serious priests is more limited than it should be. But they exist. Find them, support them, receive the sacraments from them as frequently as you can, because the sacraments, above all, the Eucharist and confession, are the primary channels through which God sustains the soul in times of darkness. Sixth, and finally, do not be afraid. I know that sounds strange given everything I have just told you. I know that some of what I have shared today is genuinely frightening. 3 cities with darkness that is demonic in nature. A period of judgment upon a civilization that has abandoned God. These are not comfortable subjects. But I want you to remember something. I want you to remember what Our Lady said to the children at Fatima after she showed them the vision of hell, after she showed them the fire and the horror and the shrieking souls. After she showed them all of that, she said, in the end, my immaculate heart will triumph. Not might triumph, not could triumph, if conditions are favorable, will triumph. This is not a small God running a close race. This is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God who brought Israel through the Red Sea, who raised his Son from the dead, who has been writing straight with the crooked lines of human history for 6,000 years. The 3 days of darkness, if and when they come, are not the defeat of God. They are the victory of God. They are the moment in which divine providence moves decisively against the accumulated evil of the age and begins the restoration of what was lost. There is a morning after the 3 days. Mystics speak of it. The sun rises, the birds sing, the air is clean, the evil is gone. And the faithful who remain in